I'm Claire Ridgway, creator of the Anne Boleyn Files. I'm here today with Clare Cherry to discuss George Boleyn. We've just written a book on George Boleyn called George Boleyn, Tudor Poet, Courtier and Diplomat, a biography of George.
Obviously a lot of people want to know about his fall and why he had to fall with Anne and his father didn't, and the rest of the Boleyns kind of got away without being dragged down. In March of 1536 there was an inventory that was taken of not only George's belongings and assets but also Thomas's, and it kind of leads you to the conclusion that initially it was thought that they were all going to be brought down, including Thomas. But I think when the plan or the plot was devised that Anne was going to be found guilty of adultery, incest, I think at that point it was probably felt that for Thomas to be brought down on those sorts of charges was just going to be completely unbelievable. And so Thomas, it was decided that was it, he was going to get away. And I think there's probably also the issue that George was a fairly forthright, possibly slightly reckless individual, and he would have fought for his sister possibly in a way that his more conservative father may not have done.
Yes.
And he was seen as a little bit more of a threat, or a lot more of a threat than Thomas would have been.
There's also the suggestion that because he was arrested at Whitehall rather than Greenwich, that actually he may well have been on his way to see Henry because he'd heard what was going on and that he wanted to put a stop to it. So you can see George being a bit of a troublemaker if he'd been left.
Absolutely, and I don't think it was just felt that he had to be brought down with them. There was no alternative to that.
And moving on to, we also get asked whether George and Anne did commit incest, because of course that in fiction it's quite often seen that Anne was so desperate to have a son and heir for Henry that she would have turned to her brother, her sort of best friend, to help her. But the only evidence of that was Lady Worcester's kind of remarks to her brother when she was justifying her own behaviour. She said, to paraphrase, I'm not as bad as the Queen because she's, done it with a musician and her brother. But then Chapuis, reporting on the trial, the trials of Anne and George, he talks about the only proof, the only evidence of incest was the fact that George had spent a time in the Queen's chamber. Yeah. Well, we know that George would often report back to Anne on his diplomatic missions and also the quest for the annulment, because he wanted his sister to hear it from him how things were going, especially if there was bad news. And of course all those times in her chamber were then twisted later. Yeah. But for Chapuis to say that there was no evidence, no proof apart from that, just shows that it was a very flimsy case.
I mean, I don't actually know of any historian that suggests that she was guilty of incest.
No.
Because even Bernard, in his book, although he suggests that she could have been, he thought she may be guilty with Mark Smeaton and possibly Henry Norris, he doesn't try to argue that she was guilty of incest. There was no evidence.
No.
If there had been, we would know about it.
That was definitely a charge that was just to make everything so shocking and to blacken their name completely.
And there's no proof whatsoever that Jane Boleyn gave evidence of that. None whatsoever.
No, the only thing that we can link to her is the fact that they discussed Henry's sexual problems. And she would only have been telling the truth if she said that.
But the argument to suggest that Anne was having a relationship with George or anybody simply because Henry was impotent and couldn't give her a son, that's got to be a nonsense in itself, because surely if he was impotent and suddenly his wife was pregnant, that would set a few alarm bells ringing.
And it comes out looking exactly like George. Yes. Claire and I would just like to thank everyone at the Anne Boleyn Files website for asking us the questions that have inspired this video today. Thank you so much for giving us these questions and this chance to talk about one of our favourite characters, George Boleyn. Our book will be coming out very soon, George Boleyn, Tudor Poet, Courtier and Diplomat, and we hope it will be well received and that people will be interested in hearing more about George. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.